Hi, Stephen Larson here with Brush Basics. We're going to be talking about the brush basics. Why are there so many brushes and what are they used for? So you have large brushes. We'll just get right into this to make a quick and to the point video. 4-inch, broad, lots and lots of bristles, house brush. Why would you use this? For a really big painting. We're talking bigger than 3 feet by 3 feet. Anything up to, let's say, 6 feet. You could use something like this on, and if you get bigger than 6 feet, then you would want more like a broom or something even bigger than this 4-inch brush. So we move down to a 2-inch kind of angled brush that you typically use for edging a house. You can use this also for edging, creating brush strokes with a sharp, clean line on a large canvas. Anything with a sharp angle like that is going to paint a sharp line. Then that brings us to a fan brush. Now this has traditionally been used in landscape paintings, like Bob Ross for instance, to paint trees, just stippling, bouncing the greenery on pine trees for instance. Nice directional marks. Now this is very different. It's super soft. This is called a mop brush. Specifically, this is 19 millimeters and 3/4 inch mop brush. Very soft, looks like a makeup brush. This is actually primarily used in watercolor painting. It soaks up a lot of the watercolor fluid of the paint, and it allows you to really distribute that very nicely. And everything is round, so it's not going to create really hard lines. Then that brings us to a very different brush. It's a 1-inch flat brush, one of my most common brushes that I use all the time. Because it has hard edges, it creates hard lines. Because it has relatively long bristles, it can hold a lot of paint and it can drag that mark a good distance. A general concept that you can, let's see, they are roughly the same width, but the bristle lengths are very different. So the longer the bristles, the more paint it can hold. The shorter the bristles, the less paint it can hold. Also, let's look at this. See how that bends with relative ease? That is a medium firmness bristle. If it ever is just floppy, that's limp, that you don't want that. And this is very stiff. Let's see if I'll put it next to the microphone. You hear that, how it's really hard. Now this is a great brush for scrubbing a surface to really buff, like oil paint or acrylics, to buff it so that the blending is very smooth on a very smooth surface. Get in all the nooks and crannies. Very firm bristles. Those are used for buffing and friction. This is also a rounded or a filbert, relatively short bristle brush, but the reason that it's rounded is so that you don't have the hard corner lines. This one is, you can create a line based on how hard you push, and since it's really hard or stiff, you can buff the surface and really make sure you can blend very well and get it in all the nooks and crannies if you're working with a textured surface, that if you are working with a floppier brush, let's say this one, it wouldn't be able to buff as well. Moving forward, this is a filbert, or it's like halfway between a flat brush and a round brush. It's a filbert, so it's rounded, and this is really good to pull long lines or any brush marks without having a hard corner on it. It's much more smooth. Now this, if you can tell, let me bring it a little closer to the camera. This has a flat edge, and it is used for pouncing. Pounce, 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 pounce. And using that flat surface to create broad marks. I guess similar to the size of a finger paint, of touching with a finger or touching with a brush. That's kind of what that's commonly used for. And of course you can find bigger and smaller ones. This one in particular is 3/4 inch. So this is called a round brush. It has relatively long bristles so that it can hold a good amount of paint. And then you can draw with it with the paint or pull straight lines or crooked lines or whatever kind of lines. But it's used for line work a lot. This is a 1/2 inch flat brush. Now it's a little frayed because I've used it for so many years, but this is a 1/2-inch flat brush, similar to the purpose of this flat brush, but it's used for smaller areas. Like if I'm trying to fill in a 6x6 square, I might use a brush like this, but if I'm trying to fill in a 1-inch by 1-inch square or even smaller, then I need a smaller brush so that I can have more control. You can also turn flat brushes on their sides to use the blade whenever you need to create a thin, sharper line. Moving down the chain, this is a smaller brush, and as you move down, you're getting more and more detail. Also, let's compare this brush, which is pretty small, and this one, which is also small, but the length of the bristles, this one is a #1 Simply Simmons Script long bristled brush. So because it's longer, it can hold more paint, and therefore if you're trying to create long lines or writing, you don't have to refill the bristles so often with paint or ink or watercolor, whatever it may be. It will continue to work for you. Whereas a short brush might be good, this one might be good for doing pointillism, little dots, but it would not be able to make a line the length of this table like this one might be able to. So they serve different purposes, and using a long bristle brush like this can do dots, but it's not necessarily built for that. All right, and then the tiniest that you see, I'm going to have to bring this really close so you can see. I actually bent, this was a 10/0 Simply Simmons liner brush, but I actually bent half or more than half of the bristles and then cut them away way down here at the base so that I can get a really tiny detailed brush with fewer bristles, and that's because I was trying to get a detail brush. Okay, so that's the basics. Big brushes for big surface area, trying to get big marks. You would never paint a 6-foot by 6-foot painting with something like this unless you want it to take many years of your life. And then also, you would not paint a 2-inch painting with a 4-inch brush. So those are kind of obvious, but at least now you understand why you would want each one, and they don't serve the same purpose. Okay, thank you very much. Happy painting!